So disturbances of respiration, I am taking the competency number PY 6.6. Okay. So mainly I will be describing here different types of hypoxia, okay, and other disturbances of respiration. So from the physiological viewpoint, disturbances of respiration can be discussed under following headings. First is the disturbances related to respiratory gases, then abnormal respiratory patterns and pulmonary diseases. So at first, disturbances related to respiratory gases. Here, you have to study in details regarding hypoxia. What is hypoxia? What are the different types of hypoxia? Okay. Then little bit about hypercapnia, hypocapnia, asphyxia, and carbon monoxide poisoning. Then abnormal respiratory patterns. Here you have to know what is apnea, what is dyspnea, hypoventilation, hyperventilation, and periodic breathing. Periodic breathing, I suppose it was taken by Avanti ma'am, isn't it? Periodic breathing? Yes or no? Am I
Yes, sir.
audible? Periodic breathing
Yes,
was
sir.
already taken by Avanti ma'am, isn't it? During the regulation of respiration. So today I will not be telling you about periodic breathing as it is already done. Then I will be describing in very brief the different pulmonary diseases, emphysema, pneumonia, atelectasis, asthma, tuberculosis, the physiological part. Okay. Then let's start with hypoxia. So what is hypoxia? Hypoxia, you may get a long question, okay, carrying 10 marks, or you may get a short note also. So at first, what is the definition of hypoxia? Hypoxia is defined as oxygen deficiency at the tissue level. So this definition you have to give. You don't give a definition of your own, okay? So hypoxia is defined as oxygen deficiency at the tissue level. What are the important causes of hypoxia? Inadequate oxygenation of the blood in the lungs, then inadequate oxygen transport to the tissues by blood, then inadequate utilization of oxygen by the tissue cells, then inadequate rate of blood flow to the tissue, and different pulmonary diseases also may lead to hypoxia. So these are the important causes of hypoxia. Okay. So at first, definition of hypoxia, you should give a proper definition. It is defined as oxygen deficiency at the tissue level. Then what are the types of hypoxia? So depending upon the mechanism of occurrence, there are mainly 4 types of hypoxia: hypoxic hypoxia, anemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, and histotoxic hypoxia. So these are the basic 4 different types of hypoxia. Is it clear to you? Hypoxic, anemic, stagnant hypoxia, and histotoxic hypoxia. Now let's see hypoxic hypoxia. So hypoxic hypoxia is the hypoxia which occurs due to reduced partial pressure of oxygen of arterial blood. It is also known as hypoxemia. Another term is hypoxemia. Another term is also arterial hypoxia. Okay. So mainly what happens here, there is reduced PO2 of the arterial blood. So hypoxic hypoxia is the hypoxia which occurs due to reduced PO2 of arterial blood. Partial pressure of oxygen of the arterial blood is reduced in hypoxic hypoxia. It is also known as hypoxemia or arterial hypoxia. So hypoxic hypoxia occurs either due to decreased oxygen in the inspired air or due to diseases of the respiratory system that decrease oxygen supply to the tissue. Hypoxemia may be found in normal individuals at high altitudes. It is also found in complication of pneumonia and a variety of other diseases of the respiratory system. So now COVID-19 is prevalent. So in COVID-19 also there occurs what? Hypoxic hypoxia. Okay. Mainly in the COVID pneumonia. So it is seen in following conditions: low PO2 in the inspired air, example at high altitude or in closed chambers, then hypoventilation, example airway obstruction, paralysis of respiratory muscles, depression of respiratory center, scoliosis, etc. Then it may also occur in diffusion defect, example pulmonary edema, pulmonary fibrosis, lung collapse, etc. Then it may also occur in ventilation perfusion mismatch. If there is large arteriovenous shunts, atelectasis, lung collapse, cyanotic heart disease, in all these diseases, you may get hypoxia. Now let's see anemic hypoxia. So anemic hypoxia occurs due to the decreased oxygen carrying capacity of blood. So this hypoxia generally we found in anemia. Okay. So anemic hypoxia occurs due to the decreased oxygen carrying capacity of blood. When PO2 of arterial blood is normal, but the hemoglobin to carry oxygen is inadequate in amount, anemic hypoxia develops. Here, see oxygen saturation, that is PO2 of arterial blood is normal. But what happens? There is less amount of hemoglobin, which can carry the oxygen. Hence, anemic hypoxia, anemia, carbon monoxide poisoning. Just remember, carbon monoxide poisoning, it is a type of anemic hypoxia. Okay, then altered hemoglobin like methemoglobin, sulfhemoglobin. So in anemic hypoxia, as the PO2 of inspired air and the diffusion capacity of lung are normal, the PO2 of arterial blood is normal. But the oxygen supply to the tissue is reduced as adequate hemoglobin is not available to transport oxygen. So I suppose the pathophysiology is clear to you. What is the main reason? What is the mechanism of anemic hypoxia? What is the main reason? Because there is inadequate hemoglobin, which can carry the oxygen, although the PO2 is normal. The affinity, now let's move on to the carbon monoxide poisoning. Okay. So the what happens here, the affinity of carbon monoxide for hemoglobin is about 200 times greater than the affinity of oxygen. So affinity of carbon monoxide is more than oxygen. It is around 200 times more. Okay. So what happens? Carbon monoxide combines with hemoglobin to form carboxyhemoglobin. And release of carbon monoxide from carboxyhemoglobin is very slow due to the high affinity of carbon monoxide to hemoglobin. Since the affinity is more, so what happens? Carboxyhemoglobin, so from carboxyhemoglobin, the hemoglobin is very slowly released. So what happens? Very less amount of hemoglobin is available for binding with the oxygen. Okay, hence hemoglobin cannot bind with oxygen. Thus, in carbon monoxide poisoning, though the hemoglobin content is normal, hemoglobin is not available to deliver oxygen to the tissue. Got it? Hence, carbon monoxide poisoning is classified as anemic hypoxia. I suppose you have understood what happens in carbon monoxide poisoning. Okay. Similarly, in methemoglobin also, there is a condition known as methemoglobinemia. Okay. So generally, methemoglobin is present in our blood around 1 to 2%. But if the amount of methemoglobin increases in our blood, there may be some congenital genetic defects which may lead to increased amount of methemoglobin in the blood, and that is known as methemoglobinemia. So in methemoglobinemia also, you will be getting anemic hypoxia. And what is the main reason? In methemoglobin, iron is present in ferric form instead of the ferrous form, and thus incapable of oxygen transport. Okay. In hemoglobin, the iron is in the ferrous form, but in methemoglobin, the iron is present in the ferric form, and this ferric form is incapable of oxygen transport. So that is the main reason why we get anemic hypoxia in methemoglobinemia. Okay. So this is all about anemic hypoxia. Then come to the stagnant hypoxia. So hypoxia occurring due to the decreased blood flow to the tissue is called stagnant hypoxia. So just from the term stagnant means what? It is not moving. The blood is not moving. Okay. So there is stagnancy of the blood. So as a result, what happens? There is hypoperfusion hypoxia. Okay. As it causes decreased perfusion of tissues due to stagnation of blood flow. The blood flow is stagnant, so it is not flowing to the tissues. Hence, oxygen cannot be delivered to the tissues. Hence, we get hypoxia. Got it? What is the mechanism of stagnant hypoxia? It is due to the decreased blood flow. It is due to the decreased blood flow. Okay. The hemoglobin content is okay. The PO2 is Okay, but what happens? The blood is not flowing, it is stagnant, hence there is the tissue cannot be perfused with oxygen. বুঝি পাইছা? Oxygen content of arterial blood is normal and the hemoglobin content is also normal. Okay, but main reason is there is decreased perfusion, decreased blood flow. So it occurs either due to decreased cardiac output or decreased blood flow. Okay, if the cardiac output is very low, then the blood, the tissue perfusion suffers, isn't it? Blood flow cannot, there is less amount of blood flow to the tissues due to decreased cardiac output. Or if there is decreased blood flow due to any other reason, then there will be stagnant hypoxia. So stagnant hypoxia is seen in shock, heart failure, vascular obstruction. Okay, so these are the important causes of stagnant hypoxia. So in shock, whenever there is peripheral circulatory failure, whenever there is shock, we get stagnant hypoxia since the blood cannot flow to the tissues. Okay, hence the oxygen cannot be delivered. So shock in heart failure occurs due to decreased cardiac output. Okay, then in vascular obstruction, suppose in any part or if any in any organ there is vascular obstruction, then what will happen? There will be specific organ hypoxia, there will be stagnant hypoxia in that part. Okay, so these are the important causes of stagnant hypoxia. Now come to the histotoxic hypoxia. When tissue cannot utilize oxygen in spite of normal oxygen supply, the resulting hypoxia is called histotoxic hypoxia. Got it? Here also, there is normal oxygen saturation, there is normal hemoglobin. Okay, but what happened? The tissue cannot utilize the oxygen due to some reasons. Okay, so that type of hypoxia is known as histotoxic. Toxic, from the term itself, toxic, you may get an idea that there is some toxic substances which is causing this hypoxia. Okay, so classic example of histotoxic hypoxia is the cyanide poisoning. Okay, the classic cause of inability of the tissues to use oxygen is cyanide poisoning, where the action of the enzyme cytochrome oxidase is blocked by cyanide to such an extent that the tissue simply cannot use oxygen even when plenty is available. So plenty of oxygen is there, but the tissue is not able to utilize this oxygen due to because the cytochrome oxidase is blocked by cyanide. Okay, so this leads to histotoxic hypoxia. Also, deficiency of some of the tissue cellular oxidative enzymes can lead to this type of hypoxia. For example, in the disease beriberi, several important steps in tissue utilization of oxygen and the formation of carbon dioxide are compromised because of vitamin B deficiency. So in beriberi also, in severe cases of beriberi, you may get histotoxic hypoxia. But main is the cyanide poisoning. You should remember cyanide poisoning causes histotoxic hypoxia. Okay. I suppose I am audible and the PPT is visible to you.
Yes, sir.
If there is
Yes, sir.
if there is any problem in the
Yes, sir.
either in the audio or in the video, you just let me know. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So now let's see the characteristic features of different types of hypoxia in the tabular form. Okay. So hypoxic hypoxia, anemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, histotoxic hypoxia. So pathophysiology, see, hypoxic hypoxia occurs due to decreased oxygen tension, decreased partial pressure of oxygen. Okay. But anemic hypoxia occurs due to low oxygen carrying capacity of blood. Stagnant hypoxia occurs due to decreased blood flow to tissue, and histotoxic hypoxia occurs due to decreased ability of the tissue to utilize oxygen. Whatever I have told, it is in this tabular form. Okay, so it is the summary of the different types of hypoxia. Then coming to the causes, hypoxic hypoxia cause low oxygen tension, okay, low partial pressure of oxygen in inspired air, then hypoventilation, then decreased diffusion of oxygen across respiratory membrane, then physiological shunt, anatomical shunt. So all these are the important causes of hypoxic hypoxia. Then anemic hypoxia, decreased RBC count, decreased hemoglobin content of blood, and altered hemoglobin. Okay, altered hemoglobin. With that, carbon monoxide poisoning. Anemic hypoxia, carbon monoxide poisoning is also there. Okay. Then stagnant hypoxia causes the shock, circulatory failure. Histotoxic hypoxia, cyanide poisoning. Then what happens to the arterial PO2 in hypoxia? It is decreased. But in all the other types of hypoxia, it is normal. Okay, it is normal in all the other types of hypoxia. Only it is decreased in the hypoxic hypoxia. Then arterial oxygen content, it is decreased in hypoxic hypoxia. In anemic, it is markedly decreased.
Okay.
Then in stagnant and histotoxic hypoxia, it is normal. Arterial hemoglobin content, it is normal in hypoxic hypoxia, but it is reduced in the anemic hypoxia. Okay, so arterial hemoglobin content, it is normal in all the other types of anemia, in all the other types of hypoxia except anemic hypoxia. Got it? Then oxygen saturation in arterial blood, it is decreased in hypoxic hypoxia and anemic hypoxia. In stagnant and histotoxic, it is carrying capacity of arterial blood. It is normal in all the other types of hypoxia except anemic hypoxia. Oxygen carrying capacity of arterial blood is decreased because hemoglobin is less. Okay. Then arteriovenous PO2 difference, it is decreased in hypoxic hypoxia. Then in anemic hypoxia, it is normal. In stagnant hypoxia, it is more than normal. And in histotoxic hypoxia, less than normal. Then cyanosis. Just remember cyanosis, it is present in hypoxic hypoxia, okay, and also in stagnant hypoxia, but cyanosis is absent in anemic hypoxia and histotoxic, okay. So cyanosis you will find in case of hypoxic hypoxia in severe cases and in stagnant hypoxia, but you will not find cyanosis in anemic hypoxia and histotoxic hypoxia. Then peripheral chemoreceptor stimulation, it is present in hypoxic hypoxia because dissolved oxygen in plasma is reduced, but chemoreceptor stimulation, peripheral chemoreceptor stimulation is absent in case of anemic hypoxia. Why? Because dissolved oxygen in plasma is sufficient. Okay, and the chemoreceptor stimulation is also present in the stagnant and histotoxic hypoxia. Then tachypnea you will find only in case of hypoxic hypoxia. Okay, in other types of hypoxia, it is absent, tachypnea. So this is in a nutshell the different types of anemia. So come to the effects of hypoxia. What are the effects of hypoxia? Hypoxia mainly affects CNS, especially the higher centers. Effects of hypoxia depend on the severity, duration, and type of hypoxia. So type of hypoxia, it may be acute and subacute hypoxia, or it may be severe hypoxia. Okay. So features of acute hypoxia resemble acute alcoholism. Impaired judgment and motor incoordination are major manifestations of acute hypoxia. So remember, in acute hypoxia, what is the main feature? Impaired judgment and motor incoordination. Okay, these are the major manifestations of acute hypoxia. If hypoxia persists for a longer period, the features are fatigue, drowsiness, nausea, headache, hyperventilation, dyspnea, apathy, inattentiveness, delayed reaction time, reduced work capacity, confusion, and disorientation. In severe hypoxia, hypertension also occurs. Okay. In severe and prolonged hypoxia, brainstem is depressed and death results from respiratory failure. Okay. So in severe and prolonged hypoxia, death may occur due to the due to respiratory failure because the brainstem is depressed. Okay. So this is the cause of death in severe and prolonged hypoxia. Then anaerobic glycolysis results in formation of more lactic acid that leads to metabolic acidosis. Stimulation of chemoreceptors by hypoxia produces hyperventilation. Effects of hypoxia and cells. What is the effect of hypoxia and cells? Let's see. Transcription factors known as hypoxia inducible factors, HIF. Okay. What is it? Hypoxia inducible factors. These are produced by hypoxia. I suppose you have got an idea during this acclimatization, high voltage physiology. It was told to you regarding this transcription factors. Okay. So hypoxia inducible factors have alpha and beta subunits. Normally, in the presence of adequate oxygen in the tissues, alpha subunits are rapidly removed from the cells. Okay. In hypoxic conditions, what happens? There is dimerization of alpha and beta subunits occur in the cells. The alpha beta dimers cause induction of genes that produce erythropoietin and angiogenic factors. So, you have learned that whenever there is hypoxia, there is stimulation of there is stimulation is there to produce more amount of erythropoietin, isn't it? So this is due to this transcription factor, which is known as hypoxia inducible factors. Okay. So the alpha beta dimers cause induction of genes that produce erythropoietin and angiogenic factors. This is one of the causes of angiogenesis or neovascularization in hypoxic tissues. So new vessels develop in hypoxic tissues, isn't it? So this is due to this hypoxia inducible factors, HIF. Okay. Then effects of hypoxia and brain. Already I have told you what are the effects of hypoxia and brain. Brain tissue is highly sensitive to hypoxia. Sudden fall in inspired PO2 to less than 20 mm mercury causes loss of consciousness. So you just remember this, okay? If PO2 is less than 20 mm mercury, there will be immediate loss of consciousness in about 15 seconds. Okay. If hypoxia continues, death can occur in 4 to 5 minutes. So if PO2 falls less than 20 millimeter mercury, that will occur within 4 to 5 minutes. Okay. So you have heard that in COVID pneumonia, many patients are dying, isn't it? So this is due to hypoxia. So this can typically occur in sudden drop in cabin pressure in a plane flying above 16,000 meter. Also in plane which is flying at very high altitude, there may be sudden drop of pressure, okay? And hypoxia may occur. Then, however, hypoxia of lower intensities cause the symptoms similar to that of acute alcohol intoxication, such as disorientation, impaired judgment, headache, drowsiness. If the hypoxia is of lower intensity, then you will get features similar to acute alcohol intoxication, such as disorientation, impaired judgment, headache, drowsiness, etc. Now come to chronic hypoxia. It occurs due to the exposure to low PO2, 40 to 60 millimeter mercury for long periods. Okay. Example, as would occur after stay for extended period of time at altitudes of approximately 10,000 to 18,000 feet. Okay. So in high altitude, you may get chronic hypoxia. In chronic hypoxia, polycythemia occurs due to increased erythropoietin production. Already I told you regarding HIF. Due to HIF, there is erythropoietin production. Okay, there is angiogenesis. There is polycythemia. Okay. So symptoms of chronic hypoxia are severe fatigue, dyspnea, shortness of breath, respiratory arrhythmias. Example, Cheyne-Stokes breathing, periodic breathing, isn't it? Then let's see the signs of hypoxia: tachycardia, tachypnea, cyanosis. So tachycardia, it occurs as a peripheral chemoreceptor reflex response to low arterial oxygen tension. Okay, so already you know why tachycardia occurs. Then tachypnea, it presents in the hypoxic hypoxia where arterial PO2 is low, but absent in both anemic hypoxia and stagnant hypoxia. Already I told you tachypnea you will find in hypoxic hypoxia only, but not in anemic, stagnant hypoxia or histotoxic hypoxia. Okay, tachypnea you will find only in hypoxic hypoxia. Then cyanosis, it is the bluish discoloration of skin, all of you know, and mucous membrane caused by the presence of more than 5 gram of deoxyhemoglobin per 100 ml of the capillary blood. So what is the minimum requirement? There should be at least 5 gram of deoxyhemoglobin per 100 ml of capillary blood. Then only there will be cyanosis. So this is very important. Okay, this level. What is the level? There should be at least 5 gram of deoxyhemoglobin per 100 ml of capillary blood. Then only there will be bluish discoloration of the skin and mucous membrane. Okay. So cyanosis may be found in severe hypoxic hypoxia and stagnant hypoxia. Only in these two types of hypoxia you will be getting cyanosis, but it is not found in anemic and histotoxic hypoxia. Just remember, I suppose all of you know already what are the types of cyanosis, peripheral and central, isn't it? So peripheral cyanosis is seen in the nail beds and is suggestive of stagnant hypoxia. Peripheral cyanosis is more suggestive of stagnant hypoxia. This is because perfusion in these distally located areas is worst affected in hypotensive states. Large amount of oxygen is extracted from the hemoglobin and the concentration of deoxyhemoglobin rises to produce cyanosis. So mainly in stagnant hypoxia, you will be getting peripheral cyanosis. In central cyanosis, it is seen in the mucous membrane of lips and tongue. You already know, isn't it? So these areas receive good blood supply and become cyanotic only if the oxygen saturation of blood is low, as occurs in hypoxic hypoxia. So in severe cases of hypoxic hypoxia, you will be getting central cyanosis, not in the early stage. You should remember that cyanosis is not a reliable sign of hypoxia. Okay, it is not a reliable sign of hypoxia because why? Because severe anemic patients may never develop cyanosis. You will not be getting in anemic hypoxia, isn't it? Even though they are extremely hypoxic, because there will not be enough deoxygenated hemoglobin. Why? Why cyanosis does not occur in anemic hypoxia or in severe anemia patients? Because there will not be enough deoxygenated hemoglobin to produce cyanosis in anemic hypoxia. Minimum, there should be, as already I have told you, there should be around 5 gram of, more than 5 gram of deoxyhemoglobin per 100 ml of the capillary blood. But in anemic patients, there is not enough deoxygenated hemoglobin, so cyanosis is absent in anemic hypoxia. In severe anemia patients, cyanosis is absent. Okay. Then cyanosis does not occur in histotoxic hypoxia because the oxygen saturation of hemoglobin is normal. In histotoxic hypoxia, what happens? The oxygen saturation of hemoglobin is normal. Hence, you will not be getting cyanosis. In contrast, patients with polycythemia may also present with cyanosis. Further, methemoglobinemia with its slate gray color can also impart a bluish color to tissues. So you see, there is no so due to this reason, cyanosis is not a reliable sign of hypoxia. Okay, and you just remember, in severe anemia or in anemic hypoxia, we don't get cyanosis. Now come to oxygen therapy. Okay, so oxygen therapy is also a very relevant topic due to this COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so oxygen therapy is indicated in hypoxia. It is very useful in acute and severe hypoxia, especially when hypoxia is associated with dyspnea. So oxygen therapy, you should remember what are the types of hypoxia, what are the type of hypoxia where oxygen therapy is useful. I will be telling you. At first, let's see how oxygen is administered. Okay, so oxygen is administered by following methods: by using oxygen tent. So I suppose you have not seen patients within oxygen tent. I'll just show you. So this is oxygen tent. Okay, it is like, you can just see here this diagram. So generally children are kept here in oxygen tent. Okay, this is oxygen tent. So it is very useful in children as they usually do not tolerate mask or cannula. It is inconvenient to use mask or cannula in case of children, isn't it? So we prefer oxygen tent. It is also useful in administering hyperbaric oxygen. Then using oxygen mask, you have seen already, oxygen enters the mask at a higher velocity so that oxygen is drawn through the holes in the mask. Okay, so this is oxygen mask. Then we can administer oxygen through intranasal cannula. A cannula is inserted into the nostril. This is also known as prongs, okay, which is connected to the oxygen cylinder. Okay, then we may also administer oxygen through central piped oxygen. So in well-established hospitals, we get central line of oxygen, central piped oxygen. Okay. Then the mechanical ventilator, that is the final resort. If oxygen, that is all these methods, if they cannot decrease the hypoxia, then we have to put the patient in ventilators. Okay. So when patient is semi-conscious or comatose, oxygen is administered from a mechanical ventilator through an endotracheal or tracheostomy tube. Okay, so these are the different methods of administering oxygen therapy: through oxygen mask. This is the oxygen tent. Through, this is the nasal cannula. Okay, these are the nasal cannula or prongs. Okay, then this is the ventilator. Okay, then let's see oxygen therapy in different forms of hypoxia. At first, hypoxic hypoxia. Oxygen therapy is very useful in hypoxic hypoxia, especially hypoxia caused by low PO2 in the inspired air, then hypoventilation and impaired diffusion in the lung. However, oxygen therapy is not beneficial in hypoxic hypoxia due to AV shunts. If there is arteriovenous shunts, then oxygen therapy is not beneficial as admixture occurs after oxygenation in the lungs. Since there is shunt of the arterial and venous blood, so there will be admixture of blood, and hence this oxygenation will not be beneficial. Okay. Oxygen therapy is harmful in states of depressed respiratory center. You just remember, if the respiratory center is depressed due to some reasons, then oxygen therapy is harmful because it causes further respiratory depression. Okay, so you should remember this important points regarding oxygen therapy. Then come to anemic hypoxia. Oxygen therapy increases oxygen content of blood by increasing the quantity of dissolved oxygen in the blood. Thus, it helps in providing supply of extra oxygen to tissue. So remember, oxygen therapy is helpful, beneficial in case of hypoxia and anemic hypoxia, but it is not helpful in case of stagnant hypoxia or stagnant hypoxia and histotoxic hypoxia. Okay. Though the quantity of oxygen supplied to the tissue by dissolved form is very small, yet this improves tissue oxygenation to some extent. In carbon monoxide poisoning, hyperbaric oxygen is used as it facilitates dissociation of carbon monoxide from hemoglobin and increases the transport of oxygen in dissolved state. So in case of carbon monoxide poisoning, instead of the normal oxygen, we provide hyperbaric oxygen. Okay. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy is also a very important topic, and I will be telling you in details. Okay. Now come to stagnant hypoxia. Oxygen therapy is not much useful as blood flow to the tissue is decreased in stagnant hypoxia. Even in histotoxic hypoxia, tissue is unable to utilize oxygen, hence oxygen therapy is not very beneficial. However, hyperbaric oxygen therapy benefits by displacing the chemical bound to hemoglobin. So just remember, although normal oxygen therapy is not beneficial in case of histotoxic hypoxia, but hyperbaric oxygen has got benefit in histotoxic hypoxia. Okay. And in stagnant hypoxia, there is no role of oxygen therapy. So this is all about oxygen therapy. Then let's know details of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. This is an important topic. You may get a short note. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Okay. So I suppose already it was told during your decompression sickness, isn't it? In decompression sickness, we give hyperbaric oxygen therapy for treatment of the patient, isn't it? In Caisson's disease. I suppose you remember it was taken. Okay, so hyperbaric oxygen therapy means what? Administration of 100% oxygen at increased pressure. Okay, administration of 100% oxygen at increased pressure. Just remember, increased pressure. The pressure is increased. That's why it is hyperbaric. Okay, increased pressure. It is a unique intervention and is increasingly being used in a number of areas of medical practice, such as carbon monoxide poisoning, cyanide poisoning, decompression sickness, gas gangrene, air or gas embolism. So these are some of the clinical conditions where you require hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Carbon monoxide poisoning, cyanide poisoning. So cyanide poisoning, histotoxic hypoxia. Already I told, in histotoxic hypoxia, normal oxygen therapy is not useful, but hyperbaric oxygen therapy is used, isn't it? So carbon monoxide poisoning, cyanide poisoning, decompression sickness, gas gangrene, air or gas embolism, and there are some more uses. Okay, so these are the important uses important clinical conditions where hyperbaric oxygen therapy is used. So now let's see what is the physiological role or how the hyperbaric oxygen helps. Okay. So most oxygen carried in the blood is bound to hemoglobin, which is 97% saturated at atmospheric pressure. Some oxygen is however carried in solution, and this portion is increased at pressure due to Henry's law. Okay. So our main target is the dissolved oxygen. Okay. The oxygen which is dissolved in, which is carried in solution. So some oxygen is however carried in solution, and this portion is increased at pressure due to Henry's law, maximizing tissue oxygenation. So here what happens, due to increased pressure, more amount of dissolved oxygen is there. Okay, and this will maximize the tissue oxygenation. So Henry's law, I suppose you remember, Henry's law states that the amount of gas dissolved in a liquid or tissue is proportional to the partial pressure of that gas in contact with the liquid or tissue. So if we increase the pressure, more amount of gas will be dissolved. Okay. So here our aim is to increase the amount of dissolved oxygen by giving more amount of pressure. When breathing normobaric air, okay, that is normal atmospheric pressure, arterial oxygen tension is around 100 millimeter mercury and tissue oxygen tension is 55 millimeter mercury. However, 100% oxygen at 3 atmospheric pressure, okay, if we increase the pressure from normal atmospheric pressure to 3 atmospheric pressure, it can increase arterial oxygen tension to 2000 millimeter mercury and tissue oxygen tensions to around 500 millimeter mercury. So this will allow delivery of 60 ml oxygen per liter of blood compared to 3 ml per liter at atmospheric pressure. So see, at atmospheric pressure, only 3 ml per liter of dissolved oxygen is there. But in case of increased pressure, that is at 3 atmospheric pressure, we'll be getting 60 ml of oxygen per liter of blood. Okay. So we are getting more amount of dissolved oxygen. So this will increase the delivery of oxygen to the tissues. Okay. So this is sufficient to support resting tissues without a contribution from the hemoglobin. As the oxygen is in solution, it can reach physically obstructed areas where red blood cells cannot pass and can also enable tissue oxygenation even with impaired hemoglobin oxygen carriage, okay, such as carbon monoxide poisoning and severe anemia. So in carbon monoxide poisoning or in severe anemia, the hemoglobin is not able to carry the oxygen, but here what happens, the dissolved oxygen is increased. Okay, the amount of dissolved oxygen is increased by increasing the pressure. So it is hyperbaric oxygen. I suppose you have got an idea what is the mechanism behind this hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So you see, this is the clinical setting of giving hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Okay, there is a proper tank is there, hyperbaric oxygen, where the subject is introduced. Okay, and increased atmospheric pressure at around 3 atmospheric pressure is given here and oxygen is supplied. Okay, so this is the clinical setting of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy is very useful in many situations. However, you just remember 100% oxygen at high pressure also facilitates the onset of oxygen toxicity. There may be also oxygen toxicity. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy, you have to give at a rational amount. Okay, prescribed time duration is there, prescribed atmospheric pressure, how much pressure you have to give, all these things are already there. So according to that only hyperbaric oxygen therapy has to be given. Otherwise, there is every chance of oxygen toxicity. Okay. So let's see what are the effects of 100% oxygen therapy or what are the side effects. The effects depend on the duration of therapy with pure oxygen and the pressure at which oxygen is delivered. When given for more than 3 days, 100% oxygen produces side effects. Okay. Side effects appear early if the pressure at which oxygen administered is high. When administered at 4 atmospheres, symptoms develop in half an hour. And if administered at 6 atmospheres, the features develop in just few minutes. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy, you have to give at around 3 atmospheric pressure. If you increase the pressure, there is every chance of oxygen toxicity. Now, what are the effects? What are the features of oxygen toxicity? CNS effects. There may be nausea, irritability, dizziness, disorientation, muscle twitching, and convulsions. In severe cases, person becomes comatose. Then respiratory system, congestion and irritation of airway increases, tracheobronchial secretion, and decrease surfactant synthesis. Okay. This also causes pulmonary edema and atelectasis. So these are the effect on respiratory system. There may be pulmonary edema, there may be atelectasis. I will tell you what is atelectasis. Then spatial sensors, tinnitus, blurring of vision, loss of equilibrium, and retrolental fibroplasia in newborn that results in retinopathy of prematurity. Just remember this disease, okay? Retinopathy of prematurity. You may get an MCQ. Why this occurs? Retinopathy of prematurity, it is a side effect of hyperbaric oxygen therapy in case of newborns. Okay. So if hyperbaric oxygen therapy is given for increased amount of time, there may be retrolental fibroplasia. Okay. And there may be retinopathy. The retina may damage. That, and this is known as retinopathy of prematurity. Okay. So this is a side effect of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. If given for a longer period, 100% oxygen causes bronchopulmonary dysplasia and lung disease. This is also another important disease. You should remember bronchopulmonary dysplasia. This occurs as a side effect of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, bronchopulmonary dysplasia, and also you may get lung cysts. Okay, and this conditions, especially in infants only, treated for respiratory distress syndrome. So there are, I suppose you have read about this respiratory distress syndrome in infants due to decreased amount of surfactant, isn't it? So in case of respiratory distress syndrome, we give hyperbaric oxygen therapy. But due to this hyperbaric oxygen therapy, if it is not given in a proper amount, that is in a proper manner, then there may be bronchopulmonary dysplasia and lung cysts in case of infants. Okay, and also there may be retinopathy of prematurity. Okay, so these conditions, these diseases, you just remember which are in relation to this hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Then what is the mechanism of toxicity? What is the mechanism of oxygen toxicity? With pure oxygen therapy, oxidizing free radicals like superoxide anion and hydrogen peroxide accumulate in the body in excess amounts. Okay, so these are free radicals. Superoxide anion and hydrogen peroxide, these are free radicals which cause toxicity. Okay, they accumulate in the body in excess amount due to this hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So they oxidize the polyunsaturated fatty acids and destroy the cellular enzymes. As a result, toxic effects due to oxygen therapy develop. Okay, so this is the main mechanism of oxygen toxicity. There is what? There is synthesis of free radicals. There is synthesis of free radicals like superoxide anion and hydrogen peroxide, and this cause this toxicity. Okay, because they oxidize the polyunsaturated fatty acids and destroy the cellular enzymes. Okay, now let's see the diseases, the disturbances which are related to hypercapnia. Okay, so what is hypercapnia? It refers to increase in the arterial PCO2. Okay, so arterial carbon dioxide is more than the normal value of 40 millimeter mercury. So it occurs due to defective elimination of. Do you have any class from 10? Hello.
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay, so this topic
No,
is little
sir.
lengthy, so I will take around. I'll take additional half an hour. Okay, I suppose there's no problem.
No, sir.
Okay, so hypercapnia, it refers to an increase in the arterial PCO2. I suppose you know normal value it is around 40 millimeter mercury. Okay, so what are the causes? Effective elimination of carbon dioxide as occur in reduced pulmonary ventilation and reduced effective alveolar ventilation. Okay, then accidental inhalation of carbon dioxide in persons working in breweries and refrigeration plants though there may be accidental inhalation of carbon dioxide. Hypercapnia rarely occurs due to an increased production of carbon dioxide. So this is a very rare mechanism. Generally, this does not occur, but main is the defective elimination of carbon dioxide and accidental inhalation of carbon dioxide. So these two conditions lead to hypercapnia. What are the signs and symptoms? Hyperapnea occurs due to the stimulation of respiratory center. Okay, since there is increased amount of PCO2, so there will be stimulation of the respiratory center. Okay, through central chemoreceptors, and there will be hyperapnea. Then carbon dioxide narcosis develops when arterial PCO2 increases above 50 millimeter mercury. So if the PCO2 increases more than 50 millimeter mercury, then there will be carbon dioxide narcosis. Now let's see hypocapnia. So hypocapnia, it is the reduced PCO2. It is usually associated with respiratory alkalosis. Okay, hypocapnia occurs due to hyperventilation. So just remember, you don't require details of hypocapnia. Just you will remember hypocapnia. It is usually associated with respiratory alkalosis. Okay. Then let's see asphyxia. What is asphyxia? Asphyxia refers to a condition in which hypoxia is associated with hypercapnia. Okay. So you may be asked in oral, what is asphyxia? What is asphyxia? So then you have to tell asphyxia refers to a condition in which hypoxia is associated with hypercapnia. So I will just I just want to tell you that whenever you are asked definition in physiology, give a proper definition. Okay, whatever definition is given in your class or what is given in standard textbooks, don't give definitions from your own, because that will not carry the exact accurate meaning. Okay, so whenever you will be asked what is asphyxia, you have to tell asphyxia refers to a condition in which hypoxia is associated with hypercapnia. So both there will be hypoxia and there will be hypercapnia. What are the causes, important causes of asphyxia? Strangulation. Okay, strangulation, I suppose you know. Drowning, then acute tracheal obstruction. Acute tracheal obstruction may be due to entry of food or due to choking, or something may enter the trachea. Okay, so in all these cases, asphyxia will occur. Then if there is paralysis of diaphragm, as occurs in acute poliomyelitis. So all these are important causes of asphyxia. Then let's see drowning. Drowning also, it is a very important cause of asphyxia, and you should know some important points related to drowning. Okay, so there are two main mechanisms by which effects of drowning ultimately cause death. What are the mechanisms by which drowning cause death? So one mechanism is asphyxia. Okay, so asphyxia is the cause of death in only 10% of cases. Just remember, asphyxia is the cause of death in only about 10% of cases. Asphyxia occurs initially due to breath holding, and after the breathing in effect, due to the severe laryngospasm induced by first gasp of water, the laryngospasm prevents entry of water into the lungs, but soon produces death due to asphyxia. So what happens actually, how the asphyxia occurs, whenever a person is drowned in water, he holds the breath, isn't it? He doesn't allow the water to enter inside his nostril. Okay, so there is voluntary, so he tries to hold the breath. After this, what happens? There is breaking in. Breaking in effect means after some time he will not be able to hold his breath, isn't it? Then what will happen? There will be severe laryngospasm. Okay, when the first gasp of water will enter inside the larynx, there will be intense laryngospasm. The larynx will go into a spasm. Okay, and due to this laryngospasm, prevents entry of water into the lungs. But due to this laryngospasm, what happens? There is also asphyxia. Air also cannot enter inside the lungs. Got it? So at first there is breath holding. After breath holding, when there is breaking in effect, when the person cannot hold his breath, what will happen? There will be severe laryngospasm to prevent the entry of water inside the lungs. But this laryngospasm is so severe that it will also prevent entry of air into the lungs, and there will be asphyxia and the person will die. Okay, thus see, Thus, the lungs remain dry in asphyxial death due to drowning. So it is a very contradictory statement, isn't it? So you will think that the patient has drowned, but still the lungs is dry. Why? Because there is laryngospasm. There is severe laryngospasm, which will prevent the entry of air into the water into the lungs. Hence, the lungs will be dry. But due to this laryngospasm, what happened? Air also cannot enter inside the lungs, and the person will die due to the severe asphyxia. Got it? So, in this case, the lungs will be dry. In only around 10% of cases. In rest of the cases, you will be getting wet drowning. Okay. Then the second mechanism, flooding of lungs with water. This occurs in around 90% of cases of drowning. The muscles of glottis relax and allow entry of water into the lungs. Okay, if there is no laryngospasm, the glottis will be relaxed and it will allow entry of water into the lungs. Further events depend upon the type of water. Again, now it will, what type of drowning, that is whether it is freshwater drowning or it is seawater drowning. Based upon this, you will be getting the different mechanism. In freshwater drowning, it is associated with rapid absorption of water. Okay, in freshwater drowning, that means whenever the person is drowned in any pond, lake, river, except sea in well also, that is in seawater drowning, that is a different mechanism, but in other types of drowning, in any other type of water, it is freshwater drowning. Okay, so in freshwater drowning, it is associated with rapid absorption of water since it is hypotonic into the circulation, which causes plasma dilution. There is plasma dilution and intravascular hemolysis. Okay, so the normal isotonic environment will be disturbed. Okay, and since the water will enter inside the circulation, there will be plasma dilution and there will be intravascular hemolysis in freshwater drowning. In seawater drowning, it is associated with hypovolemia due to draining of water from the circulation. Here, what happens? See, seawater, there is lot of NaCl, isn't it? There is lot of sodium chloride. So what happens? Water will be coming in from our intravascular part. Okay, so there will be hypovolemia due to draining of water. More amount of water will be coming out from the intravascular compartment. Okay, and there will be hypovolemia. Okay, and the since the seawater is hypertonic, so this is the mechanism in seawater drowning. So there will be mainly hypovolemia. Okay, the patient will die due to hypovolemia because more amount of water is drained from the intravascular compartment. Okay. Now let's see carbon monoxide poisoning. So carbon monoxide poisoning, it is a dangerous gas. Carbon monoxide is a dangerous gas present in exhaust of gasoline engines, coal mines, gases from deep wells and underground drainage systems. Toxic effects, carbon monoxide produces anemic hypoxia. I suppose you remember, I told you carbon monoxide produces anemic hypoxia and derangement of cellular metabolic system. Carbon monoxide causes toxic effects on cytochrome system of the cells, causing derangement of the cellular metabolic system. Symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, headache and nausea, loss of consciousness. Death may occur when hemoglobin is 50% saturated with carbon monoxide. So if the hemoglobin is 50% saturated with carbon monoxide, death may occur. Treatment of carbon monoxide poisoning, when diagnosed timely, following measures should be taken promptly. Immediate termination of exposure to carbon monoxide, then immediate hyperbaric oxygen therapy and administration of air with few percentage of carbon dioxide to stimulate the respiratory center. With that, you have to also provide carbon dioxide to stimulate the respiratory center, and you have to provide immediate hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Okay, now come to the respiratory disturbances due to abnormal respiratory pattern. Okay, so at first let's see apnea. The apnea, what is apnea? I suppose you know. Apnea refers to a temporary cessation of breathing. Okay, temporary cessation of breathing. Depending upon the cause, apnea may be of the following types: voluntary apnea, apnea after hyperventilation, then deglutition apnea, breath holding attacks, sleep apnea, adrenaline apnea. So there are different types of apnea. You just go through your book, what happens in case of apnea after hyperventilation, then what is deglutition apnea. I will not tell you in details because time is little less. Okay, just I will be telling little bit about the voluntary apnea. So voluntary apnea refers to a temporary arrest of breathing due to voluntary control of respiration. It is also called breath holding. Okay, the breath holding time or apnea time during which breathing can be withheld voluntarily is about 40 to 60 seconds in a normal person after deep inspiration. So breath holding time is very less. It is around 1 minute only. Okay, and breaking point. Already I told you what is breaking point. Breaking point is the point at which breathing can no longer be voluntarily inhibited. At this point, chemical regulation overcomes the neural regulation. The breaking point is due to an increased arterial PCO2 and a decreased PO2. Okay, so we cannot hold the breath above the breaking point. The breaking point occurs after around 40 to 60 seconds. Now come to dyspnea. Dyspnea literally means distressed breathing. Okay, increased respiration without discomfort is called hyperapnea. Hyperapnea, you should be able to distinguish between dyspnea and hyperapnea. Hyperapnea, there is increased respiration without discomfort, but increased respiration with discomfort is dyspnea. Okay, you should know the difference between dyspnea and hyperapnea. Hyperapnea, increased respiration without discomfort, but in dyspnea there is distress, feeling of distress. Okay, one is not aware of one's respiration till resting pulmonary ventilation becomes more than double. When hyperapnea involves 4 to 5-fold increase in pulmonary ventilation, an unpleasant sensation or discomfort is felt. This type of respiration is called dyspnea. The word air hunger is used as synonym to dyspnea in general language. Dyspnea point refers to the height of hyperapnea at which dyspnea appears. So I suppose you have understood what is dyspnea. Okay, it is distressed breathing, increased respiration with feeling of discomfort. What is the definition of dyspnea? Increased respiration with a feeling of discomfort is known as dyspnea. What are the causes of dyspnea? Physiologically, dyspnea occurs in severe muscular exercise. In severe muscular exercise also, you may have dyspnea. Okay. Then pathological causes include respiratory disorders such as bronchial asthma, emphysema, pneumonia, pulmonary edema, and pneumothorax. Then cardiac failure. Then metabolic disorders causing dyspnea are diabetic acidosis, uremia, increased hydrogen ion concentration. Then metabolic acidosis causes dyspnea by increasing the pulmonary ventilation. Okay, so these are the important causes of dyspnea: respiratory disorders, cardiac failure, metabolic disorders. Then what are the predisposing factors for dyspnea? Low vital capacity. Then if the MVV is less, okay, maximum ventilatory volume. I suppose you know what is maximum ventilatory volume. In the pulmonary function test, in the lung volume and capacities, I suppose you have read about the MVV, maximum ventilatory volume. This is the important concept. Okay, you may also get a short note regarding MVV. What is MVV? Okay, so patients with reduced MVV are more predisposed to get dyspnea. Normal value is 120 liter per minute. What is the normal value of MVV? It is 120 liter per minute. If MVV is less than that, if it is reduced MVV, then the subject is predisposed to dyspnea. Then another term is breathing reserve. Breathing reserve. Okay. So individuals with less breathing reserve are more prone to get dyspnea. If the breathing reserve is less, then also the subject is prone to get dyspnea. What is breathing reserve? Breathing reserve is the difference between MVV and respiratory minute volume. Okay, respiratory minute volume. Difference between MVV and respiratory minute volume is the breathing reserve. RMV, that is respiratory minute volume, is the volume of air that is taken in or given out per minute. Okay, so normal tidal amount is 500 ml. Okay, with that, around per minute, we around take 12 or 13 breaths. So 500 into 12, it is around 6 liter per minute. Okay, so 6 liter per minute is the normal respiratory minute volume. Okay, so breathing reserve is MVV minus RVM. So MVV is 120 liter, RMV is 6 liter. So 120 minus 6 is 114 liter per minute. So breathing reserve, normal breathing reserve is 114 liter per minute. So you should know what is MVV, what is breathing reserve. Okay, these are important concepts. So next, what is Disney index, DI? DI refers to the breathing reserve percentage of MVV. DI is equal to breathing reserve divided by MVV into 100. You have to remember what is Disney index. You may be asked in Viva, what is Disney index? Okay, Disney index refers to the breathing reserve percentage of MVV. That is breathing reserve divided by MVV into 100 percentage. So 114 breathing reserve divided by 120 MVV into 100, we get 95%. So normal Disney index is 95%. The normal range of Disney index, it ranges from 70% to 95%. Dyspnea occurs when Disney index is less than 60%. So if Disney index is less than 60%, then you will be getting dyspnea. Okay. So you can see if the breathing reserve is decreased or if the MVV is decreased, then you will be getting less amount of Disney index, and so dyspnea may occur in that subject if the Disney index is less than 60%. Okay, Disney index is also a important short note. Then come to hypoventilation. Hypoventilation is used to describe a decrease in the rate and force of respiration. Hypoventilation, both the it is decrease in the rate and force of respiration. Okay. Thus, in hypoventilation, the amount of air moving in and out of lungs is reduced. Causes of hypoventilation are depression of respiratory center by some drugs and partial paralysis of respiratory muscles. What is the effect? Hypoventilation leads to hypoxia and hypercapnia, respiratory acidosis, which result in an increase in rate and force of respiration, and the patient may develop dyspnea. I am going little fast, okay, because some more topics are there. Then hyperventilation. So you have already read about hyperventilation. It was told to you. Hyperventilation refers to an increase in the rate as well as force of respiration. You should remember the definition, proper definition. Okay. So hyperventilation, what is hyperventilation? Ventilation, it refers to an increase in the rate as well as the force of respiration. Okay. So thus in hyperventilation, the amount of air moving in and out of lungs is increased. What are the important causes of hyperventilation? During exercise, due to stimulation of respiratory centers by increased PCO2, you will be getting hyperventilation. Then voluntary hyperventilation and secondary to hypoxia. So these are the important causes of hyperventilation. Now let's see some specific pulmonary abnormalities which may lead to respiratory disturbances. There are different respiratory diseases, okay, but I'll be telling you only some important respiratory diseases. The rest of the diseases you'll be learning as you progress to second MB and final MB. Okay, so but only the physiological important points I'll be telling you regarding these specific pulmonary abnormalities. So first one is the chronic pulmonary emphysema. Okay, chronic pulmonary emphysema. I suppose you have heard about the term pulmonary emphysema, isn't it? What is emphysema? The term pulmonary emphysema is usually used to describe a complex obstructive and destructive process of the lungs, okay, caused by many years of smoking. Main etiology is the smoking of tobacco, okay, smoking of nicotine. That is the main reason of pulmonary emphysema. It results from the following major pathophysiological changes in the lungs. Okay, what are the pathophysiological changes? You see, due to this chronic infection caused by inhaling smoke or other substances that irritate the bronchi and bronchioles, due to this irritant, that is the smoke, nicotine, there is irritation of the bronchi and bronchioles. Okay, then with that there is partial paralysis of the cilia of the respiratory epithelium. Okay, the cilia of the respiratory epithelium also cannot work properly, due to which what happens, the mucus cannot be moved easily out of the passage. Okay, and moreover, due to this irritation, there is stimulation of excess amount of mucus secretion. Okay, so you see, due to this chronic infection, due to this chronic inhalation of smoke or nicotine, what happens, there is irritation of the bronchi and bronchioles. Then there is with that there is paralysis of the cilia, so the mucus cannot be moved easily. With that, due to this irritation, there is excess amount of mucus secretion. So all these things exacerbate the condition. Okay. The infection, excess mucus, and inflammatory edema of the bronchial epithelium together cause chronic obstruction of many of the smaller airways. So many of the smaller airways are obstructed. Okay. So COPD, another term is COPD of this chronic emphysema. Okay, in COPD you will be getting chronic emphysema as well as chronic bronchitis. The obstruction of the airways makes it especially difficult to expire. So mainly there is difficulty to expire, thus causing entrapment of air in the alveoli and overstretching them. This effect combined with the lung infection causes marked destruction of as much as 50 to 80% of the alveolar walls. Okay, so alveolar walls are also destroyed. So this is normal lung alveolus. So here you see what is happening. All these alveolus are destroyed. The normal lung parenchyma is destroyed. Okay. Many of the alveoli are confluent. Many of the alveoli, they come in together. Okay. So there is overstretching, there is alveolar damage. Now, what are the physiological effects of chronic emphysema? The bronchial obstruction increases airway resistance and results in increased work of breathing. Okay, there is increased work of breathing. Work of breathing also, it comes as a short note. Okay. So I suppose you already know what is work of breathing. The marked loss of alveolar walls greatly decrease the diffusing capacity of the lung. So diffusing capacity of the lung is also decreased, which reduces the ability of the lungs to oxygenate the blood and remove carbon dioxide from the blood. Loss of large portion of the alveolar wall also decreases the number of pulmonary capillaries through which blood can pass. As a result, the pulmonary vascular resistance often increases, causing pulmonary hypertension, which in turn overloads the right side of the heart and frequently causes right-sided heart failure. So you see, as a result of COPD, as a result of chronic emphysema, there is pulmonary hypertension, and due to this pulmonary hypertension, there is right-sided heart failure. Okay. Come to pneumonia. The term pneumonia includes any inflammatory condition of the lung in which some or all of the alveoli are filled with fluid and blood cells. Eventually, large areas of the lungs become consolidated. So another term for pneumonia is consolidation, isn't it? So large areas of the lungs become consolidated, which means that they are filled with fluid and cellular debris. Okay. In persons with pneumonia, the gas exchange functions of the lungs decline in different stages of the disease. In early stages, the pneumonia process might well be localized to only one lung, with alveolar ventilation reduced, while blood flow through the lung continues normally in early stage. This condition causes two major pulmonary abnormalities. What are the abnormalities? Reduction in the total available surface area of the respiratory membrane and a decreased ventilation perfusion ratio. So both these effects cause hypoxemia and hypercapnia. So here you will be getting both hypoxemia and hypercapnia. Okay, so here you see all the alveoli are filled with fluid and blood cells and inflammatory cells. Okay, so consolidation occurs. Come to atelectasis. What is atelectasis? Atelectasis means collapse of the alveoli. It can occur in localized areas of lung or in the entire lung. The entire lung also may be collapsed, or it may be localized to some part of the lung. What are the common causes of atelectasis? Total obstruction of the airway or lack of surfactant in the fluids lining the alveoli. So these are the two major causes, common causes of atelectasis. There may be total obstruction of the airway, okay, or there may be lack of surfactant. The airway obstruction type of atelectasis usually results from blockage of many small bronchi with mucus or obstruction of a major bronchus by either a large mucus plug or some solid object such as tumor. So if there is obstruction of the airway either may be due to mucus, okay, or it may be some solid object, or it may be due to tumor. So all this may cause obstruction of the airway, and as a result, there may be atelectasis. Also, if there is lack of surfactant, the alveoli cannot distend, okay, and the alveoli will collapse and atelectasis will occur. In hyaline membrane disease, also called respiratory distress syndrome, which often occurs in newborn premature babies, the quantity of surfactant secreted by the alveoli is so greatly depressed, leading to collapse of lung. Okay, so you already know what is respiratory distress syndrome. Here you will be getting the collapse of the lung. So that is the atelectasis. Okay, many of these infants die of suffocation when large portion of the lungs become atelectic. Then collapse of the lung tissue not only occludes the alveoli, but also almost always increases the resistance to blood flow through pulmonary vessels of the collapsed lung. Blood flow through the atelectic lung is greatly reduced. Come to asthma. Asthma is characterized by spastic contraction of the smooth muscle in the bronchioles, which partially obstructs the bronchioles and causes extremely difficult breathing. I suppose all of you have got an idea of asthma, isn't it? So there is spastic contraction of the smooth muscles of the bronchioles. As a result, what will happen? The person cannot get the proper amount of air, isn't it? Proper amount of oxygen. The usual cause of asthma is contractile hypersensitivity. There is hypersensitivity of the bronchioles in response to foreign substances in the air. In about 70% of patients younger than 30 years, the asthma is caused by allergic hypersensitivity, especially sensitivity to plant pollens. Okay, so plant pollens is one of the important allergen. In older people, the cause is almost always hypersensitivity to non-allergic types of irritants in the air, such as irritants in smoke. So due to some irritants, allergen only, there is asthma. Okay. What happens in asthma? The FRC, the functional residual capacity and the residual volume of the lung becomes specially increased during an acute asthma attack. Okay, so this FRC and RV increases because of the difficulty in expiring air from the lungs. The lung cannot expire the air. Okay, so FRC and residual volume will increase. Also, over a period of years, the chest case become permanently enlarged, causing a barrel chest. And both the FRC and the lung RV, that is residual volume, become permanently increased. So in asthma, FRC and RV increases, and there may be a barrel chest. Barrel chest you may also get in emphysema. Then tuberculosis. This is the last topic. So pulmonary tuberculosis is a chronic infection of the lung parenchyma caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. The invasion of lung parenchyma by tubercle bacilli causes infiltration of the infected area by macrophages and walling off of the lesion by fibrous tissue to form the so-called tubercle. Okay, tubercle is formed. There is caseous necrosis. Okay, so you will be getting caseous necrosis and there will be formation of tuberculosis. All these details are not required. The pathophysiology of tuberculosis you will be getting in higher semester in pathology. Okay, but just I am giving you the introductory part. Okay, so pulmonary tuberculosis, it is a chronic infection. Okay, due to Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and here what happens? Formation of tubercle occurs in the lung. So tuberculosis in its late stages causes many areas of the fibrosis and reduces the total amount of lung tissue. There is increased work on the part of the respiratory muscles to cause pulmonary ventilation and reduce vital capacity and breathing capacity. So vital capacity is reduced, breathing capacity is reduced, the work of breathing is increased in tuberculosis. Okay. Initially, the alveoli in the affected part become non-functioning due to thickness of respiratory membrane. When a large part of the lung is involved, the diffusing capacity is very much reduced. Abnormal ventilation perfusion ratio in the lungs further reduces overall pulmonary diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So these are the mechanisms which occur in tuberculosis. Okay, so I have told you in a very rapid way